You are without beginning and without end, non-dual, beyond comparison, and none can measure you. You are without color, without expression, without form, and without attributes. You are unlimited and unfathomable, beyond imagination and conception, eternal and imperishable. You are indivisible, and none can see you but with eyes divine. You always were, you always are, and you are will be. You are everywhere, you are in everything. You are also beyond everywhere and beyond everything. You are in the firmament and in the depths. You are manifest and unmanifest on all planes and beyond all planes. You are in the three worlds and also beyond the three worlds. You are imperceptible and independent. You are the creator, the Lord of Lords, the knower of all minds and hearts. You are omnipotent and omnipresent. Your knowledge infinite, power infinite, and bliss infinite. You are the ocean of knowledge, all knowing, infinitely knowing, the knower of the past, the present, and the future. And you are knowledge itself. You are all merciful and eternally benevolent. You are the soul of souls, the one with infinite attributes. You are the trinity of truth, knowledge, and the bliss. You are the source of truth, the ocean of love. You are the ancient one, the highest of the high. You are Prabhu and Parameswar. You are beyond God and beyond God also. You are Parabrahma, Paramatma, Allah, Ilahi, Izdan, Ahura Mazda, God Almighty, and God the Beloved. You are named Jesus, that is only one worthy of worship. Om Parabrahma Paramatma, Ya Izdan, Ya Allah, O God, Father in heaven. We repent, O God, most merciful, for all our sins, for every thought that was false or unjust or unclean, for every word spoken that ought not to have been spoken, for every deed done that ought not to have been done. We repent for every deed and word and thought inspired by selfishness, for every deed and word and thought inspired by hatred. We repent most especially for every lustful thought, for every lustful action, for every lie, for all hypocrisy, for every promise given but not fulfilled, and for all slander and backbiting. Most especially also, we repent for every action that has brought ruin to others, for every word and deed that has given others pain, and for every wish that pain should befall others. In your unbounded mercy, we ask you to forgive us, O God, for all these sins committed by us, and to forgive us for our constant failures to think and speak and act according to your will. Beloved God, help us all to love you more and more and more and more and still at more till we become worthy of union with you, and help us all to hold fast to Baba's domain till the very end. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Jai Baba. Thank you, sir. Okay, Pavan, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you. Jai Baba, let me share my screen. Is my screen visible? Oh.
Not yet, Pavan.
Okay. Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay. So just a quick one. Everybody have come out. Let me myself on thing. Okay, it's visible, right, Kiran?
Yes, Pavan. Clear.
Oh, so let me get started. Jai Baba to everyone. And today I'm going to talk about the topic called the Avatar in Discourses. It's not a small chapter, around 3 or 4 pages matter. కానీ నేను ఫస్ట్ టైం చదివాను ఆ చాప్టర్, దెన్ ఐ వాజ్ నాట్ ఏబుల్ టు, I mean, it sounded very factual to me, and I was trying to figure out what do we derive out of this chapter, what is the learnings out of this chapter. So I read it again, and then I just felt that maybe we need to structure the takeaways from this chapter by giving a little bit of background on matter. So the slides I prepared gives a little bit of the background and then gets straight into the actual topic and matter. So a lot of this background is a repetition. Many of us in this call are aware of this or has been discussed in other chapters or other discussions or other presentations. So bear with me. I think it's important to repeat that background constantly for all of us to get the essence of this chapter, which is the Avatar. Okay, so let me proceed. Like I've spoken in the past, God Speaks and Discourses are the two main books and matter by Meher Baba. There are a lot of other literature, but these are considered like the two main books. God Speaks is like the design manual, design specifications manual, right? How did the universe come into place? How did it get designed, right? What happened, right? Millions of years ago. Consciousness, evolution of consciousness. These are the topics that are dealt with in God Speaks. And Discourses is more like an operations manual. How do we live our life with the teachings of Meher Baba? Right? Knowing the teachings of Meher Baba, how can we lead our lives? So these are the two. I've spoken about this in the past, but it's always a nice starting point. Why is this chapter very interesting? At least this is my personal view on matter. If you look at most of the chapters in the Discourses, this chapter, I mean, most of the chapters, if you look at chapters, it talks about ego, sanskaras, karma, reincarnation, spiritual advancement, sadhana, selfless service, meditation, etc., etc. It talks about different aspects of our spiritual life, which allows us to understand our spirituality, ourselves better, and then by extension allows us to be able to live our life in a more spiritual manner. That's what most of the chapters in Discourses represents. But when we talk about the Avatar, the chapter, in a sense, this chapter, along with a few other chapters in Discourses, like the man God and the circle of the avatars, if you combine these chapters, it felt to me, okay, to my limited understanding, like a bridge between the operations manual and our design specifications. And it felt like a bridge between God Speaks and Discourses in a way. That's why I had to read the chapter twice on Mata. And I was reading the chapter, it's if I have to explain that chapter in one page, one slide, I can explain the chapter, that Avatar is when God comes in human form, and he represents a certain divinity, and he has a circle of close followers around him, and you have other people who go through lives of cycles of birth and death, and then they eventually reach God realization, and they are called the Godmen or the perfect masters or the Sadgurus. That's what the chapter would have just been in terms of me explaining that. So that's why I had to read it again to try and get the essence of the chapter. So this section, when you look at it, has 3 broad chapters, like I spoke to you about it. The first is the Avatar, which is what I'm covering today. After that, there are 3 chapters called the Man God, and either somebody else or maybe I myself will cover it in a future presentation. Today, I'm focusing on the first one, which is the Avatar. And then there are 2 other chapters called the Circle and the Circles of the Avatar. Okay. And this talks about essentially the close disciples, right? That the perfect master has around 12 disciples, which is always, all perfect masters have 12 close disciples. The Avatar of the age has 122, 14 of them very close circle, 12 men and 2 women, and then you have the other concentric circles around them. So there are specific separate chapters on that topic as well. So let's take a step back. To me, to understand this chapter, the avatar, I think it's important to take a step back and really get some perspective back into, into the beginning of this chapter of the avatar. Okay. And as I said, to me, some of these chapters felt to me personally like a bridge or a connection between God speaks and discourses. I have not read that anywhere. It's not a commentary by anybody. It's my own interpretation on that. So in the beginning, and I know Ravimai had shared a few slides about this in the past. In the beginning, right, at some point in time, I'll try to keep it very simple. If I try to keep it simple, some technicalities might be compromised, and it will, at least the understanding will be better. So there was only consciousness, right? It was still, there were no impressions. It was just existing on a super consciousness, if you will, right? This has been explained in the God Speaks. And this is what Baba would call the oversoul or the Paramatma, right? It was at peace. There was a consciousness which was completely still in a way. Okay, that's what happened many millions of years ago. And at some point, there was a question that arose to this consciousness, saying that, who am I? Okay, it was a whim. It was a sudden, just like a drop in the water, in a still water. Suddenly you throw a stone in that still water. A question came up saying, who am I? And that question essentially created the first impression or a first sanskara. And as we may have read, I'm compressing a lot of things over here, but that led to a point where that sanskara needed to be manifested. It created the first subset of consciousness, another soul within the oversoul or the Paramatma, which was in the form of a stone, and it had a certain level of a consciousness, and it created a certain set of natural sanskaras. That stone, over a period of time, progressed in its consciousness. There were more natural sanskaras that kept getting created. It reached a certain maximum point, and eventually it evolved into a metal. That had its cycle of a progression in terms of consciousness. Parallelly, sanskaras kept getting created, natural sanskaras. And then that progressed to insect or vegetation or plants. Then that similar thing happened. It progressed or evolved into insects, birds, animals, and then eventually humans. By the time the evolution went into the human form, there were 2-3 things that kind of changed the game on Mata, okay, compared to the previous consciousness levels, right? Number one was, what came into the mix was ego. So animals do not have ego, but ego came into the mix for humans. Ego in the combining with the sanskaras of that particular human being, right, used thoughts and emotions to fulfill their desires. And that created further levels of sanskaras. Okay. This started becoming another cycle. So humans started going through cycles of life and death and life and death, life and death, through this process, accumulating a lot of sanskaras. But if you look at the left and the right of this slide, on the left started off with a whim, right? Ultimately created these subsets or droplets of souls, which are fundamentally inherently the same across any form of consciousness, but by nature of the sanskaric footprint, by nature of the physical looks, physical aspects, right? It looks they are different, but fundamentally there is a unity across all these souls. And the journey is to ultimately realize that what I am is actually that same part of that Paramatma, which leads to God realization. Okay. So all of this is not explained so much in the discourses. Okay. I'm just trying to put some thing. And so what happened was within our human lives, and I've also presented this slide before, so I'm not going to go into detail, but essentially an active sanskara factory got created, right? We are a factory of sanskara creators, basically. So as we are growing in consciousness, we go through lives and births from stone to human consciousness. Sanskaras keep getting created. These sanskaras then define our egos. In combination with the egos, influence our desires. And through our thoughts, emotions, we try to fulfill these desires, and we end up creating even more sanskaras. And this is a vicious cycle. So I was always thinking, what is a simpler way of explaining this to Ahan? And a nice way of explaining this sanskaric cycle is through iPhones, right? So if you look at these various models of iPhones from 2007 all the way to the current versions, think of each version as a certain life of that particular iPhone. And there's the same user, which is the soul, right? So as I'm using the iPhone, then at some point that particular iPhone becomes old-fashioned, it dies as a model. You buy a new model. But let us say Chantimai is buying his new model of the iPhone. The impressions of the way he used the previous iPhone is registered on the cloud somewhere, right? And although the soul remains the same, the operating system of that iPhone remains the same, the body changes. But when Chantimai starts using this new iPhone, his previous behavioral patterns of how he used the previous iPhone influences the use of the new iPhone, which means he will start getting certain medical recommendations automatically because he logs in through the same ID, right? He gets in those same medical recommendations. He gets in certain motivational, snippets that keeps coming in, very similar, influenced by his behavior with the previous iPhone or a previous life. If it is Kiran, he might change from one iPhone to another to the next iPhone. He might be getting, without having to do anything differently, he's influenced by the share market. There are share prices, stock prices that are popping up without him having to do something different. So this is the basis of a few lives ago, how he was using the iPhone in the version of 2009. Now he's in 2016. Those sanskaric footprints in the iPhone moved from one body of an iPhone to another body of the iPhone. That was a nice, simple way to explain how the sanskaric footprints goes from one life to another life. And it continues to stay, right? But fundamentally, if you look at whether the shape and size of these iPhones are different, the body is different, at the core, there is an operating system, there is a soul, which is fundamentally the same. And no matter who is using that iPhone, they're all having that same soul. The soul itself is the same. An iPhone has a button called Restore to Factory Settings, which is there. Press that button, you go back to its original state, which is the Aham Brahmasmi state. In the human form, we don't have a button which says Restore Factory Settings, right? So we have to go through our cycles of birth and death to eventually reach that understanding that we are ultimately God. And that's what Meher Baba effectively says, right? If you really look at this image, right? We are all living in a world which is a God unconscious world or a divine unconscious world. We do not understand our own divinity. We have a path through duality, good, bad, fair, unfair, life, death, and so on and so forth. And our path is ultimately to get towards God consciousness, which is fundamentally a subset of the Paramatma. This is what Meher Baba says. And this essentially becomes the starting point of the chapter, the Avatar. Okay. And they're very, very, when I started looking at, as I said, when I read it the first time, I'm like, Emundrai chapter lo ultimately God in human form his avatar. He has 14 close followers. He lives life in a manner which is so divine. There's a perfect master. When thing I said 5 bullet points, I'll finish the presentation, Ani. But when you take this whole backdrop of it, which is what I was when I tried to do some thinking, that is the starting point of this chapter of the Avatar. Because the starting of this chapter essentially says, consciously or unconsciously, every living creature is seeking one thing, whether we are conscious about it or unconscious about it, whether we are at a certain level of our spiritual growth, irrespective of where we are, right? Whether we fundamentally disagree with spirituality and some of these teachings, or whether we have an academic understanding of spirituality, not an experiential, but academic understanding of spirituality. Every person, every living creature is seeking one thing, okay? And the object of the quest is called by many names. It's called as happiness, peace, freedom, liberation, truth, love, perfection, self-realization, God realization, union with God, whatever might be the case. For those who do not believe in God, they might not be calling it God realization. But somewhere they're I will not believe it if they're saying that I don't want to be happy, or I don't want to be peaceful, I don't want to feel liberated. Some person is looking for this, going to a temple, believing in God. Some other person might be traveling to the jungles and feeling one with nature. Somebody else would like to go to the top of a mountain, looks at the sky, looks at the valleys, looks at the sea, and feels like one with nature. But there is an innate need, right, amongst everyone, every living creature, to try and get this objective of being happy, of being peaceful. Okay. And everyone has moments of happiness, glimpses of this truth, fleeting experiences of this union with God. For those who don't believe in God, of feeling one with what is around you is another way of saying this. Okay, like I gave that example, and I keep going back to every once in a while, I like to go back to Gautam as an example. Whether we believe or do not believe, when you went or went to the top of Kilimanjaro or whichever that peak is, right, there is a sense of satisfaction, but there is also a sense of a moment where you feel, wow, one with nature, one with something bigger than yourself. So all of us have these moments of or glimpses of this experience, and all of us inherently, whether we know it or do not know it, want to make this a permanent experience. Most of the times we do not know it because we are so much, all of us are chasing the materialistic dream, right? And so we are so much immersed in that, we do not realize that this is what our pursuit is, actually something else. Our pursuit is something different. So that's the first part of the chapter. First part of the chapter essentially states that there is the divine unconscious, there's the divine consciousness. We don't, irrespective of our levels in our where we are in our journey, inherently there is a pursuit towards the divine consciousness. Okay, that's the summary of this slide. The second very interesting point in this chapter, which came as a very interesting insight to me, is that all of us, through our lives and death and life and death, have a very, very feeble, deep-rooted memory that where we originally came from, Anmata. Somewhere deep, 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 deep in the recesses of our minds, deep inside, we have a faint memory. This is what Baba is saying in the discourses, that we have a faint memory of where we originally came from. Okay, and that is the Om, the starting point of everything, right? So there is that sort of a feeble memory that I think I'm a part of this creator. So there's creation and creator. Creator is whoever you might call it, the bigger consciousness, Big Bang theory, I don't know, whatever you might call that. There's a creator, and we are the subjects or the objects of those creation. And there's a deep-rooted memory that effectively is telling all of us, irrespective, that we need to head in a certain direction to go back home, something like that. Okay. And there's very interesting perspectives between the creator, how God, this is what Meher Baba says, how God would look at his creation and the evolution of his creation. Evolution of creation, the creator looks at it as just a divine game. It's just a divine game that is happening, where there are certain people who are limited by their thoughts, limited by their power, limited by their ability to be blissful in life, who are trying to go through life, and eventually they will get there. That is the perspective from the creator, from God's perspective. From a creation perspective, creature perspective, like ourselves, our perspective is very different. Our perspective of looking at evolution is like a fight against all odds of good and bad, fair and unfair, pleasure and pain, happiness and sadness. We're constantly divided in this duality of good and bad, and so on and so forth. And we look at life as a struggle. And at some point in time, a perfect master is needed to help us, or an avatar would be needed to help us go beyond this particular balance, go back to this point, to transition from the God unconscious to the God consciousness, where you go beyond the duality of life. And that is what leads to God realization. Okay. So that's the second important point I want you to think about. Okay. The first important point, there's an innate need. The second important point is that we have in our memory where we originally came from. It's a very feeble thing in our memory, covered by loads and loads of illusory sanskaras, karmic impressions, etc. Okay. So, God realized souls, you have a few types. Most God realized souls leave the body once and forever and become one with God. This is called mukti or moksha or liberation, right? So at some point in time, the person lived their life, and when they drop their body, they have realized God, and that's it. They become one and in union with God. Okay. Then you have some God realized souls that retain the body for a time. However, they are unaware of their body or this creation around them. They are so much immersed in God, so much one with God, right? It's called Vaide Mukti, that they are unaware of their own body and their surroundings. They're just in bliss with God, Amman. These God realized souls are not able to really help others in liberation because they are too immersed in God themselves. Okay. But people who get associated with them, who take care of them, who get associated, get some benefits, but they themselves do not consciously try to liberate other souls and help other people reach God realization. Okay, this is the second category. Third category is there are few God realized souls who are conscious of their body and also conscious of their unity with God. These God realized souls are called Paramhansas, Sadgurus, or perfect masters. They're able to help everything spiritually. They can help other souls also realize God. Okay. At any point in time, there are 56 such God realized souls. They are all very combined and unified in terms of their consciousness, but they might be different parts of the world and they might have different functions. And most of them will leave this world pretty much unknown to humanity. They will be doing some work, but they are not necessarily very well known to humanity. Out of these 56, at any given point in time, there are 5 perfect masters or Sadgurus who are more well known to the world. They have different needs, activities, whatever. Some of them might be speakers. They speak and they try to move the consciousness of the world. Some others are doers. they have different activities to do. So these are the 5 Sadgurus who are usually very, very well known in the global situation. So that's about God realized souls, right? So we know that we initially and essentially have the innate need to become God realized. We also know that deep inside our memories, we don't know, but that's what Meher Baba is saying, that deep inside you have a memory of where you originally came from. You know that you are part of the Paramatma. Then you have God realized souls. We are aware of many of them. And where does the avatar then come into the picture? Who is the avatar? The picture lo, it's almost this is more jokingly. You have Baba is also wondering, I've got all these perfect masters, Sadgurus around me. Who am I? What is an avatar, really? Right? So the avatar, yes, the simplest way of explaining an avatar is when God comes down into human form. But if we come down to a little bit more of a specific definition, which is there in the chapter, there are 3 key points to understand about the avatar. Okay. Avatar was the first individual soul to emerge from the evolutionary and involutionary process as a Sadguru. Ante, when souls started getting created from a broader consciousness, a higher consciousness, the first soul that reached God realization, right, is that first avatar. After that, that avatar at regular intervals of time, right, of between 700 to 1400 years, typically comes down to the earth in human form. Okay, I didn't know about this, quite frankly. Okay, so I just felt there is somebody called God, and then that God takes human form and comes down. That's my understanding of that. But if you really look at it, as you get deeper and deeper, Baba has explained every aspect or many aspects in fair level of detail, right? So starts off with the consciousness, starts off how souls are getting created, says that these souls are fundamentally the same. They are united in the fact that they're all the same. They're part of the bigger whole, WHOLE. And then goes on to say that that first soul that became God realized is what became the avatar. So they don't keep taking birth and death because they already became God realized. They do not have the cycle of birth and death, but every 700 to 1400 years is when that particular soul keeps taking birth into human form, okay, which is whom we call as the avatar. And usually the avatar, the entrance of the avatar or the realization of the avatar of his godhood is precipitated by the 5 Sadgurus of that particular point in time. Okay. And the avataric period is preceded by the utmost intensity of suffering. And if you take a Bhagavad Gita shloka, right, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, that particular shloka is what Baba is also talking about in a way. At every point in time, before an avatar descends upon the earth, there is the intensity of certain problems in the universe or in the world increases significantly. And again, when you take this thing into consideration, I used to wonder, I used to hear Baba says, you follow me, I'm the latest pill. And I felt it's very advertising, marketing. I mean, Rama, Krishna, Jesus, everybody is the same, right? Different avatars. Why should he be promoting himself so much? I used to keep getting a doubt in my mind. But it's not that. It's about how the contextuality of when that avatar came into the world defined their teachings at that point in time. Okay. What were the main problems? In the case of when Baba came in, the science and technology progress was very, very tremendously high. That's why he needed to explain evolution. I mean, we had the Darwin's theory. We had the theory of relativity and the Big Bang theory. We had Freudian theories of consciousness. So all these things were taking over and religion was being given a bashing around the time when Baba came into existence. And therefore, if you look at a lot of his teachings, it talks a lot about explaining a lot of these concepts, right, which science was attempting to explain in a manner. Okay. So anyways, so the Avataric period is preceded by utmost intensity of suffering. The 5 Sadgurus of the age precipitate until they bring it to a stage where the Avatar descends, comes, realizes his state, and there you have God in human form. If you don't believe in God, that's fine. It's that soul which became God, realized, or if you don't believe in God, realized the unity with the higher consciousness. That soul which did that, assuming there is no God, right? Because God is just an English name or a word, in my view. That soul comes back when it descends back on earth as Rama, Krishna, Jesus, Buddha, Meher Baba. We call them the Avatar. The purpose of the Avatar is twofold. There are two main reasons why the Avatar comes down to the world, okay, by and large. Number one is to bring a new release of power or a new awakening of consciousness, a seismic shift in consciousness to the entire universe, whatever is relevant at that point in time. And I'll open it up for other people to comment on this. In my view, for Baba, it was about love, which was a big part of the consciousness, awakening people to the concept of love, to feel in one with the universe and a higher consciousness, what seemed to be the shift he was making to the overall consciousness of the world. But I don't know if that's the right thing. But definitely, if you look at Rama, you look at Krishna, you look at Jesus, you look at Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, you look at Buddha, there was something specific that they did, which over an extended duration of time shifted the consciousness around the universe. Okay, so that's one big task. I never used to understand also a lot of times, even now I don't fully understand. When they say Baba used to do a lot of universal work, he used to go, Baba suffered so much for us. What did he suffer? I'm not able to understand. What is that suffering? He used to go in seclusion. Okay, he went into seclusion. What is it that he had to go through sufferings? I've never been able to understand that, right? And then you have a lot of the Mandali members who keep constantly saying he went through a lot of suffering. What is that suffering? I still do not understand. But definitely, what I got a glimpse of through this chapter was that there was a twofold purpose for the Avatar to come to the world. One is to create or lift the consciousness in a transformatory way, in a transformational way, in a certain direction. That was number one. And number two, for avatars to come down to the world in human form, is to be a living example of how to live a divinely human life. It is to set a gauge, a benchmark, Anmata. This is how you can live your life in a divine way. Because when the avatar comes down to the earth, they are limited by the bodily constraints. Some people say, oh, he's God. Why did he feel pain? When Baba dropped his body, he had severe spasms. You can say he's God. Why should he go through these spasms and go through such suffering? He can just do something and bless himself and go beyond, not feel that pain. But by coming into the human form, he has taken the limitations that comes with that, Anmata. And so the avatar, the second massive purpose of the avatar is to give to the world an aspiration of how life can be lived in a divine fashion, in a divine way. These are the two main purposes of why the avatar comes down to the world. I didn't get any other image. I know this is a completely different context, circle of friends, Kani, but that's the circle of the avatar. Look, we should talk about it as a separate topic. It's just some data points that have been provided that every perfect master has 12 close circle disciples. In the case of the avatar, they have 122. There are 10 concentric circles of 12 followers each circle. In the closest circle, you have 12 plus 2, 12 men and 2 women who are the closest disciples of Baba. And all these people, these close concentric circles, the circle of the avatar, there are two things. One is either in that life or in a few more lifetimes, they achieve God realization, but they play a very big role in helping the avatar in shifting the consciousness of the world, helping people in God realization in their own paths, moving at a more macroscopic level, shifting the consciousness in a different direction. This circle of the avatar helps the avatar himself in doing so. So, why is this chapter important to us? Apart from some data points, this is my takeaway. Yeah. Why is this? On the left, you have Hazrat Babajan, who's a perfect master. On the right, you have Baba. To me, I think there are two main importances of this chapter. Again, this is my personal view. Okay. It gives us the notion of the potential of what we can become. That's living perfect masters who are humans like us over several births. We have seen them grow and evolve into becoming perfect masters, to become one with God. So one, this chapter is very important for us to understand the potential of what we as regular human beings with all our faults and travails and our weaknesses and strengths. This is one big aspect. And the second is the potential of what we can be, because that's what Baba's life was all about. As a human, in the human form, how can we live our lives in the most divine way? These are the two takeaways of what we have. A long way to go where we can become a perfect master or a God man. But to me, it is that aspiration. It is the fact that we have the potential to become that. And Baba's life was a living story or living experience of what we as humans can be. That's the baseline. That's the set and matter. Like that's the record that has been set, and we know that it is possible for us to get there. Right? Of course, we can't become like that in one go, but it is incremental changes, incremental improvements, small improvements that we are able to apply. How to love God, as an example, simple things that we can do on a day-to-day basis that causes incremental improvements for us in our very, very long journey towards Baba. That's pretty much it in terms of this particular chapter. Jai Baba, thank you very much. Pass it back to the moderator. Jai Baba.